For 20 long years, the sprawling Hamilton estate had been a place of whispers and shadows. Once a lively mansion filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses, it now stood as a hollow monument to sorrow. Behind its tall iron gates lived Richard Hamilton, one of the wealthiest men in the country, but also one of the loneliest. 2 decades earlier, Richard's beloved wife, Eleanor, had suffered a tragic car accident. The crash left her body intact but her mind trapped in an unending slumber. Doctors called it a persistent vegetative state. To Richard, it was nothing less than a cruel prison that had stolen his wife but refused to let her die. Every night, he would sit beside her bed in the mansion's private medical wing, speaking softly as though she could hear. He told her about the world changing outside, new skyscrapers, shifting markets, the wars and the peace treaties, the new technologies. He told her how their daughter, Grace, had grown from a little girl into a strong woman, now 25 years old. But no matter how much he spoke, Eleanor's eyes remained closed, her breath shallow and mechanical. Doctors had long given up hope. If she hasn't woken in 20 years, Mr. Hamilton, one neurologist had said bluntly, she never will. But Richard refused to sign any order to pull the plug. Money bought Eleanor the best medical care, around-the-clock nurses, and every new experimental treatment that came onto the market. None worked. By now, even the loyal staff had grown weary of the eerie quietness in the Hamilton mansion. Servants whispered rumors, some said Mrs. Hamilton's soul was trapped, others claimed Richard was cursed for some past sin. And still, life continued, routine and empty. Then one summer morning, everything began to change. The new maid. It was Grace, not Richard, who insisted on hiring a new maid. Father, the staff keeps leaving. We need someone steady. Someone who doesn't just care about the paycheck. And so, Rosa arrived, a widowed woman in her 30s, humble and hardworking. She brought along her teenage son, Daniel, who often accompanied her after school since she couldn't afford childcare. Daniel was a quiet boy of 16, polite but curious. While Rosa scrubbed floors and polished silver, Daniel wandered the grand hallways, always with wide eyes as though he were walking through a museum. He was fascinated not by the wealth but by the history. One day, his wandering brought him near the forbidden wing, the part of the house everyone avoided. The medical wing where Mrs. Hamilton lay. The air there was heavy, the silence suffocating. But curiosity tugged at him, and soon, he found himself standing at the doorway. Through the half-open door, he saw Eleanor for the first time. She lay on a large hospital bed, her pale face framed by soft brown hair that time had streaked with gray. Tubes ran to machines that beeped steadily. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of a machine's help, not life's spark. Something inside Daniel stirred. He wasn't frightened as others claimed to be. Instead, he felt drawn. He whispered softly, "Hello." No one answered, of course. But Daniel began sneaking in whenever his mother was busy. He would sit beside Eleanor and talk. Unlike Richard, who spoke of business and worldly matters, Daniel spoke of simple things. His school days, his dreams of becoming a musician, the loneliness of being poor and fatherless, the way he sometimes felt invisible in a world that only saw wealth and power. At first, it was just a habit. But slowly, he began to notice strange things. The flicker of life. It started small. One afternoon, as Daniel strummed an old guitar softly by her bedside, he thought he saw Eleanor's finger twitch. He froze, staring at her hand. Maybe it was just a muscle spasm, he reasoned. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling. The next day, he brought the guitar again. He played a melody his late father had taught him, one filled with haunting beauty. And again, he saw it, the faintest flutter of Eleanor's eyelids. Heart racing, Daniel leaned forward. "Can you hear me? If you can, just give me a sign." Her lips didn't move, her eyes didn't open, but her breathing shifted slightly, as though it had changed tempo to follow the rhythm of the music. Daniel ran to his mother, blurting out what he had seen. Rosa scolded him. "Don't you go making up stories, Daniel. That poor woman has been asleep longer than you've been alive. Don't get Mr. Hamilton's hopes up." But Daniel knew what he saw. Something inside him told him Eleanor wasn't gone, she was trapped, fighting, waiting for someone to reach her. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he believed he might be the one to do it. Daniel couldn't stay away from Eleanor. Every chance he got, he returned to her bedside, his old guitar slung over his shoulder. The mansion's silence had always unsettled him, But here, in this quiet room, his music seemed to fill a void. At first, he played softly, afraid the nurses or staff might scold him. But soon, his sessions grew longer. He played melodies of sorrow, hope, and joy, pouring all his emotions into each chord. He spoke between songs, too, telling Eleanor things he'd never told anyone. "I know what it feels like to be stuck," he confessed one night. "I feel like I'll never escape being poor. People look at me like I don't matter. But when I play music, I feel alive. I wonder, maybe you feel the same inside. Maybe you're stuck, but you want to feel alive too." That night, Eleanor's hand shifted again, just a subtle motion, but undeniable. The daughter's suspicion. Grace Hamilton noticed the change before anyone else. She often visited her mother, though less than her father. It hurt her too much to see Eleanor lying motionless year after year. But one afternoon, when she walked into the medical wing, she saw Daniel sitting there, strumming his guitar. She froze. At first, she wanted to scold him for intruding. But then she noticed something unusual. Her mother's eyelids fluttering ever so slightly, her breathing no longer shallow but deeper, steadier. Grace gasped. "What are you doing?" Daniel jumped, nearly dropping his guitar. I was just." Her eyes darted to her mother. "She's reacting. I've never seen her do that." Daniel swallowed. "I think she can hear me. The music, it reaches her." Grace didn't believe him at first. But over the next week, she secretly observed from the doorway. Each time Daniel played, Eleanor's responses grew stronger. A twitch of her lips, a shift of her hand, even a faint sound from her throat, like a sigh. Grace confronted her father. "Father, you need to see this. Something is happening." But Richard dismissed her. "Grace, please. I've lived with false hope for 20 years. Don't torture me with another." Yet, curiosity got the better of him. The next evening, he followed Grace to the medical wing, where Daniel once again played his guitar. Richard stood frozen as he watched his wife's fingers curl faintly in rhythm with the music. Tears welled in his eyes. "My God," he whispered. "Eleanor. The spark of hope." Doctors were called immediately. They ran tests, brain scans, and reflex checks. At first, they claimed it was coincidence, random muscle activity. But then Eleanor's reactions grew too consistent to ignore. When Daniel played, her neural scans lit up with patterns not seen in years. Her brain was responding to stimuli. "This is remarkable," one neurologist admitted. "Her auditory and emotional centers are engaging. The music, it's stirring something." Suddenly, the boy who had been invisible in the mansion became the center of everyone's attention. Nurses encouraged him to keep playing. Grace sat by his side, recording each session. Even Richard, usually stoic and cold, placed a trembling hand on the boy's shoulder and whispered, "Don't stop. Please, don't stop." Daniel played daily. Songs of hope, lullabies, hymns he had learned in church, even simple tunes he made up on the spot. Each note seemed to pull Eleanor closer to the surface of consciousness. And then, one evening, as he finished a haunting melody, something happened that stunned everyone present. Eleanor's lips parted, and a sound emerged. It wasn't clear words, but a faint murmur. A voice that hadn't been heard in 20 years. Richard fell to his knees, clutching her hand. Grace wept openly. "Play again," the doctors urged. Daniel did. And this time, Eleanor's eyelids fluttered open. Not fully, just a sliver of hazel peeking out. But it was enough. Enough to prove she wasn't gone. The doubt and the fear. News spread quickly within the mansion staff, and whispers began anew. Some said it was a miracle, others called it witchcraft. Rosa, Daniel's mother, feared it was too much attention. "You shouldn't be involved in this, Daniel," she warned. "These are powerful people. If things go wrong, they'll blame you." But Daniel shook his head. "I can't stop now, Mama. She's fighting her way back." "I know she is." Still, not everyone was supportive. One of the senior doctors cautioned Richard, "This could be temporary. Don't get your hopes too high. Coma patients sometimes show reflexes that mimic consciousness." But Richard wasn't listening. For the first time in 2 decades, he had seen his wife's eyes. However faint, however fleeting, it was enough to ignite hope in his weary heart. And Daniel knew deep down, it wasn't just reflex. Something inside Eleanor was waking. His music was the key. But the question lingered in everyone's mind, would she ever truly come back? The mansion had transformed overnight. What was once a place of shadows and whispers now buzzed with cautious hope. Nurses moved briskly, Doctors visited daily, and Richard Hamilton, who had lived in grief for 20 years, now walked with a spring in his step. At the center of it all was Daniel, the maid's son, whose music had done what millions of dollars and world-renowned doctors could not. Every evening, Daniel played for Eleanor. Each session seemed to bring her closer. Her murmurs turned into faint whispers, her eyes opened for longer stretches, and sometimes, just sometimes, she seemed to respond. One night, as Richard sat beside her with tears brimming, Eleanor's lips moved. A faint sound escaped. Richard. The billionaire's entire body trembled. He grasped her hand, pressing it to his forehead. Yes, my love, I'm here. I've always been here. Grace sobbed openly, clutching her mother's other hand. Daniel, overwhelmed, lowered his guitar and whispered a prayer under his breath. It wasn't just reflex anymore. Eleanor was speaking. The climb back. Over the next weeks, doctors designed a rehabilitation program. Daniel's music remained central, but now they added speech therapy and physical therapy. To everyone's astonishment, Eleanor responded with steady progress. Her first words were broken, childlike, but filled with emotion. Grace, so big now, she murmured one afternoon, looking at her daughter with watery eyes. Grace hugged her tightly, unable to contain her joy. Mama, I missed you every single day. Richard devoted himself fully to her recovery, canceling business meetings and moving his office into the mansion. He sat by her side. During therapy sessions, often reading aloud memories of their past life together. But always, it was Daniel's music that triggered the strongest responses. When his fingers strummed the strings, Eleanor's eyes seemed to glow with recognition, her voice stronger, her movements more determined. The doctors finally admitted what they had resisted: her recovery is unprecedented. Music, specifically this boy's music, has unlocked something deep within her brain. It's as though his melodies created a bridge between her consciousness and her body. Recognition. One quiet evening, Eleanor was sitting upright for the first time in 20 years, supported by pillows. Daniel played a gentle tune while Richard and Grace sat nearby. When the song ended, Eleanor reached out with trembling hands. Slowly, she placed one hand on Daniel's cheek. She whispered hoarsely. Your music pulled me back. Daniel froze, stunned. He had never imagined she would one day look at him, speak to him. Richard and Grace exchanged glances of awe. Eleanor smiled weakly. You gave me life again. Tears rolled down Daniel's face. He tried to respond, but words failed him. For a boy who had always felt invisible, that moment was everything. The celebration and the gift. Months later, when Eleanor had regained enough strength to walk with assistance, Richard organized a private celebration in the mansion's grand hall. The chandeliers sparkled, violins played, and old friends who had not visited in years came to witness what many called a miracle. When Eleanor appeared, walking slowly with Grace at her side, the hall erupted in applause. Richard kissed her hand like a man newly in love. But Eleanor silenced the crowd with a soft voice. This miracle was not money. Not doctors. Not me. It was a boy who believed I was still alive inside. She beckoned Daniel forward. Shy and overwhelmed, he walked to the center. The billionaire himself placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said, You have given me back my wife, my daughter's mother, and the love of my life. No amount of wealth could ever repay that. But I will try. From that day, Daniel was no longer the maid's son. Richard offered to sponsor his education, fund his music career, and ensure he never lived in poverty again. Grace treated him like a brother, and Eleanor cherished him as the boy who pulled her from darkness. The impossible return. One evening, long after the celebration had ended, Eleanor sat in the garden with Richard. The scent of roses filled the air, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt the night breeze on her skin. I should be dead, she whispered. But I was waiting, Richard. Waiting for something, or someone. And then I heard him. That boy's music. It was like a light in a black tunnel. I followed it until I found my way back to you. Richard kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. And I will spend the rest of my days thanking him, and thanking God, for bringing you back. As they sat beneath the stars, Daniel's guitar could be heard faintly from the terrace, playing the melody that had awakened her soul. Eleanor closed her eyes, not in sleep this time, but in peace. After 20 years of silence, the Hamilton mansion was alive again, with laughter, with music, and with love. And it all began with a boy who refused to believe the impossible.